Thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate it. It is wonderful to be here at the Covina Speaker Group. I want to thank Carl for the kind invitation to come and to tell a little bit about what God has done for me through the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, this big book, the 12 steps, and great sponsorship. I've been a very, very fortunate person and very blessed. None of which I deserve, but I'll take it all. Whatever God wants to give me, I'll take it all because I don't deserve any of it. So if He wants to give me more, I'm all in. He can give me more if He wants. I really believe strongly in sponsorship. I am sponsored. I not only have a sponsor, I'm actually sponsored by that sponsor, which is cool. I sponsor people. I have a home group. The name of my home group is the Treasure Map Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We got that name a number of years ago from a gentleman named Sandy B., one of my heroes in recovery from out in the Tampa, Florida area. And Sandy used to say that the big book is not the treasure, that God is the treasure, that the big book is the treasure map. And if we follow the treasure map, we will find the treasure. And I got to tell you, that's been my experience. In a nutshell, that's what I'm hoping you will hear tonight. Not that I've done anything, because at very best, out of drinking myself and selfishly living myself into a state of willingness, I follow the direction of some people much smarter and much wiser than I am to get me to where I am today. And it has nothing to do with me. So if you're out there tonight, and in a group this size, it's likely somebody's out there, who might be new or might be back, after 15 or 16 days, right? Who knows? We met a couple of people before the meeting who were in that spot, and we want to welcome you. Thank you for being a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. You are welcome here. And if you're out there tonight, maybe you're an old timer. You know what? Thanks for the example. And maybe like most of us, you're in between, right? You're not maybe a newcomer. You're not maybe an old timer. You're somewhere in between. And maybe you've had some of the thoughts like I've had over the years, right? Which is, gosh, maybe this isn't really working for me. Maybe that one thing I'm hiding from everybody out there, maybe I just need to leave before I have to expose it. I want to encourage you folks, right? Not the people necessarily who are here for the first time. We're glad you're here. God bless you. You're welcome. But maybe the people that are thinking to themselves, this is my last meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not working and I'm leaving. I want to just take a second and encourage you to not do that. Don't leave. Don't leave. Stay. Stay. And if something pings you tonight, if something knocks on that door of your heart and you've locked that thing up, just take a breath. It's okay. Just open it. Let us come and help you. Let us walk alongside of you. Let's open that book together. Let's do this work together. And at the end of that process, if you still feel that way, God bless you. God bless you. But don't leave until the work is done. Please. That's where the magic is. I didn't realize that. And somewhere around, I suppose, October of 1991, I was sitting in a cafe. Now, I got sober on August 27th of 1991. And I was sitting in a cafe in October with this guy's name was Joe Friday. He became my first AA sponsor. It's a great name for an AA sponsor, Joe Friday. And we sat there and I asked him to sponsor me. And Joe said, I don't know. I don't know if I'll sponsor you. And I thought, well, that's a bit cavalier, Joe. You're supposed to, where's the hand of willing? Where's it all at? You're supposed to just say yes. Joe would have none of that. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you my story, Mike. And then you can tell me your story. And then when we're done doing that, if we think we can work together, I'll sponsor you. And so we did. We sat there, and it was 1991, so you could smoke freely in any institution in America. And back then, we were smoking like crazy, right? And I was chugging coffee and smoking, and Joe's telling his story. And sure enough, at the end of his story, which, by the way, I didn't hear it all because I had learned that I was going to have to talk after he spoke to him. So I was writing my own story as he was speaking. Maybe some of you have had that deal go on. And so I didn't hear much of what he said. But I started in on my deal, and I got 2 or 3 minutes into my story. He just cut me off. I mean, almost rudely, really. And he said, kid, you have no idea what alcoholism is, do you? And I was 24 years old. I had been sober about 60 days. So I was a pro at this point. And I said, of course I do. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, alcoholism is when you're drunk a lot. It's when you're drunk a lot. And he just kind of gave me one of those. And he said, let me tell you something. And what he said changed absolutely my view of alcoholism and therefore recovery from it in drastic ways I'm still understanding, still growing in understanding of. But he said this to me, and it was like a 2x4 hit me right in the forehead. He said, drunkenness and alcoholism have nothing to do with each other. And I got to tell you, those were stunning words to me because I was convinced that I was here because drunkenness had dominated my life. Look, there's no question that drunkenness had dominated my life. But you know, that's different. That's different. So what he began to tell me, right, was that, look, we got, it was a virus analogy. It's a perfect time in the United States to give a virus analogy, but it's true, right? So he said to me, look, if you ever have the flu, I said, yeah. He said, well, tell me how you know you have a flu. I said, well, maybe I'm vomiting, I have a fever, some sweats, maybe some body aches, maybe some dysentery, I don't talk too much about that, but whatever it was, right? And he said, no. Those are the symptoms of the flu. How do you know you have the flu? I didn't really know what to say. And he said, look, we can give you medications. We can do all kinds of things to help thwart and reduce the magnitude of those symptoms. But until the virus is dead, Mike, you've got the flu. Even if we medicate you to the point of no visible symptoms at all, until the virus is dead, man, you've got the flu. He said, drunkenness is the symptom of alcoholism. There's many, but that's one of them. It seems to be the most obvious. And he was right. From the time I was 16, 17 years old, I was the kid waking up on my front lawn clutching a bottle of Jack Daniels. I was the kid that was passed out in his friend's back seat. I was the kid that lipped off and got some mouthy, snarky comment to the cute cheerleader girl at the high school party, only to find out she had the linebacker boyfriend on the other end of the room, I was the guy that went away in handcuffs from the police for saying something stupid or taking a swing at one of them. I was the guy who drank his way out of college, right? I mean, it looked really like, honestly, if you looked at my life, you would say drunkenness is this kid's problem. And when I reached out for help to all the people who didn't have alcoholism prior to meeting all of you, I would ask them, what do I have to do about my drunkenness? And they would say, look, go out and have 2 or 3. Go out, just modify. Don't go crazy tonight. And I got to tell you, for someone who doesn't have alcoholism, like that's fantastic advice. For a person like me who has something very different than chronic drunkenness, for someone who has alcoholism, that's horrible advice. That's horrible. I didn't know it was horrible advice. It seemed rational to me. And so what Joe began to discuss with me, and of course, knowing I only had about 60 days, he didn't get all high and mighty and self-righteous and start quoting Big Book at me like I was some idiot who didn't know the Big Book. I was an idiot, and yes, I didn't know the Big Book, but he didn't talk to me like that, right? What he knew is that I was new, and he knew that I didn't know what he knew. And so what he just simply did was tell me a story and talk to me. He asked me questions. And the questions began with things like this. Mike, have you ever decided not to get drunk and you've gone out just to have a couple and ended up insanely intoxicated? I said, oh man, you seriously, like you just described the last, 8 months to a year of my drinking right there. Because I don't know about anybody else on this phone call, but I know about me. And I had caused enough problems for people that I loved that last year or so, like I didn't want that to happen anymore. I was full of nothing but shame and regret and agony and remorse and humiliation. I didn't want that to happen anymore. It wasn't fun. It quit being fun about a year and a half before I got sober. And so I'd go out to try to not get drunk. And I couldn't figure out why I constantly got drunk in spite of not wanting to. And that's the truth. I truly and sincerely tried to control what I was doing. Once I hit a certain point in the evening, well, I didn't care then. But walking in, if you'd have hooked me up to a lie detector test and said, Mike, how many are you going to have? And I'd be like 2, maybe 3, and I'm going home. And I would have passed that lie detector test. But according to Joe and what he was explaining to this kid with 60 days of sobriety at the age of 24, sitting across from this little cafe called the Crackpot, which also is ironic that we would be sitting in a place called the Crackpot. He began to explain this. He said, in our doctor's opinion, in our big book, we have this thing called the doctor's opinion. And in there, it's a little mini chapter right before Bill's story. And in there, Dr. Silkworth describes this problem that we have. And what he says is that somehow, some way, for some reason, a small percentage of society has this thing that he called it an allergy to alcohol. And we went through that description, and he said, do you know what an allergy is? And I said, well, I think so, but not really, because when you say allergy, I think of sneezing, right? And, you know, I never really sneezed when I was drinking, so that couldn't be it. And he said, no. He said, an allergy is this. An allergy is an abnormal reaction to something. That's all it is. That your body, if you have what I have, Mike, reacts abnormally when alcohol is consumed. And I said, well, okay. And he could, I'm kind of squinting and, you know, lighting more cigarettes, smoking faster. I didn't really know what he meant, you know. And he said, look, let's put it like this. He says, the only way you can tell if you're abnormal is if you understand the normal. So let's talk about the normal. Okay. He said, do you know what people do who are normal drinkers after a couple of 2-3 drinks? He says they stop. They stop. And that might be a humorous little thing for us, but the truth is they actually do. As weird as that might sound, they actually do. And that was never me. And so from the very first explanation of what this thing called alcoholism is versus drunkenness, I thought, I got that. I got that. And you see, another thing he said is they don't enjoy feeling out of control. I got to tell you, man, I love that. I don't know about you guys. I don't know about you. To me, one of the best spots on planet Earth is anywhere on the globe with a 4 to 5 beer buzz, right? I don't mean tanked where you're like urinating on yourself, not there, right? But just that happy where you know all the lyrics to the songs, right? You have a full head of hair and one chin, right? When all the girls like you and you're really cool, you know, you have to be careful about flexing too much because you might rip through your jacket, like that 4 to 5 year buzz, right? Where all illusions seem like reality. Like it's just wonderful right there. Music's a little louder. Everything is great. Jokes are funnier. That is perfect, right? Except, gang, I gotta tell you, I could never stay there. I'd touch that bass like rounding second going into third. I would just touch it and I was right past it. I could never stay there. Because for me, for some reason, and as Joe taught me that night, I have this thing called an allergy to alcohol. And when this body digests alcohol, it has an inability to control the amount it consumes. It's just the way it is. That's just absolutely the way it is. And when Joe put an explanation on what was physiologically wrong with me, I was like a hand in glove. It just fit perfect. It just fit perfect. He said, I have a feeling, Mike, given your response, that you felt like you needed to control the amount you took for a long time, or that you shouldn't even drink at all. And I said, yeah, really? He said, did you ever call Alcoholics Anonymous before? And I was 24 as I'm sitting in this cafe. And I said, yeah. He said, when? I said, when I was 16, and then again when I was 18, and then again when I was 21. He said, so you've known for a long time something's not right with you and booze. And I said, yeah. Yeah, and I did. I truthfully did. And so he said, well, look, if you've known that long that there's been a problem, why didn't you just quit? Tell me what would happen to you when you quit. You know, I never really thought of that question. But the truth is, you would imagine for a person who had a drunkenness problem, as I thought I did, that quitting drinking would make life better. I got to tell you, for me, it made life worse. The noise in my head just got louder. The insecurities in my heart just got bigger. The worries, the things that seemingly were out of my control to manage my life got larger and larger and larger. And the weight on my shoulders got heavier and heavier and heavier. See, that's what happens to me when I stop drinking. The world gets worse. The color leaves it. It turns into this black and white 1910 soundless film, some silent picture. You know, I got no Technicolor, man. I got none of it, you know. And I can't figure that out because it seems like drinking is the problem. And so when I quit drinking, the problem should sort of go away. But according to Joe, they wouldn't and they shouldn't if I have this thing called alcoholism versus someone with a drinking problem. And so we continued to talk. And I said, yeah, you know, I did. I thought for a long time I shouldn't drink, and I've tried to not drink many times. He said, well, let's talk a little bit about the thoughts that came to you before that first drink, before you jumped back into the bottle. And I got to tell you, I never really thought about that before. You know, and of course, I didn't know that there's a whole chapter on that in our big book, right? So there's a whole thing on Dr. Silkworth and that allergy thing. And if you're new tonight, just to let you know, you can go there and read that stuff, and you can learn a lot about that. But I didn't know that there was another chapter, right, called More About Alcoholism, that describes these thoughts that precede the first drink. I didn't know that either. And so as I'm sitting there listening to him ask me questions, and I'm sort of thinking about what were those thoughts, and now in hindsight, after being sober for a while, I got to tell you, you know what's interesting to me? My alcoholism in my mind never told me the truth once. Not once. You know, my alcoholism never said, Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to say horrible things to people you love. Not once. I did it every time. Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to spend more money than you have in your pocket. Never told me that once. Always happened. Mike, if you drink tonight, she is going to find out about her. Never told me that either. There were a lot of things that my head never told me that almost always happened. Right? And so he said, let's talk a little bit about that. What's it? And you know what, really, when we got down to it, it turns out, and I don't know about your heads, I just know about mine, that the wolves in my head are disguised as sheep. My head would get me back to drinking by things like, you know what, man, you're 24, like, come on, you're making a big deal. Look. Just now, this is me talking to me, right? I mean, I'm literally having, like, you know, a dialogue, right, with myself about this. And I'm saying things like, look, just don't go crazy like you did last night. Look, you're not an idiot. You're not a moron. Just relax. Just relax. Go out and have one or two. I heard that a lot. Go out, leave at halftime. I heard that a lot. Don't bring $60 to the bar with you. Only bring 20. Like, I heard, those are the things I heard. And I'm telling you, if I could have done that, you'd have a different speaker tonight. So he said, Mike, do you have a mind that lies to you? And in this great chapter called The Doctor's Opinion in the Big Book, it tells me that people who are like me have an inability to differentiate the true from the false. And I got to tell you, I lived by that. I wouldn't have called it that, but that's exactly what I lived by. I lived by this rule. If I think it, it must be true. If I think it, it must be true. It never dawned on me that what might be rocking and rolling through my head is a complete falsehood. It never occurred to me that was possible. Right? And so I'm out here on planet Earth with a broken thinker, trying to make decisions about life, feeling inadequate, right? No wonder I'm a mess. And when I get to be a mess, I got to tell you what I long for: peace. Long for peace. So I'm out in the world making crazy decisions, and all of these decisions, drunk or sober, not just drunk or sober. All the bad results of those crazy decisions are making knots in my stomach. Knots in my stomach. And the only thing that makes the knots go away, not drunkenness, one or two drinks. You see, I get a sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks that I see my friends and family taking with impunity. And yet when I do it, it triggers something physiological in me, and I'm off to the races. No matter who I've promised that I won't do that again. And by the way, every single promise I made, with the exception of a handful, were sincere. I got tired of seeing the people I love have tears rolling down their face because of the things I said or did to them. And so when I'd make promises to stop it, especially in that last year or so, I meant it, man. I meant it. I swear to God, Mom, I'm never going to do that again. I swear to God, Pat, I'm never going to do that again. I swear to God, honey, it won't happen again. And I meant it. And yet, somehow, for some reason, when this head would talk me into a couple of belts, I'd be off to the races again. And it wasn't until I sat there with Joe Friday and that big book open in this little cafe called the Crap Pot that began to become reality to me. And he said, Mike, before we get into the good news, I got to tell you the bad news. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not doctors. We can't fix your body. If you have the allergy, you're going to have it till the day you die. Until they throw dirt on you, you're going to have it. If you have 2 months of sobriety or 2 years or 22 years and you drink again, that allergy is going to trigger itself and you're going to be right back to the races again, man. There's nothing we can do about your body. And I don't know about California AA very much. You guys know much more about it than I do. I know about South Dakota and Chicago AA, right? And there's some folks, and they're well-intentioned, and God bless them. And you would almost think that they would sort of qualify for what I'm about to say next. But Joe told me this was true. He said, by the way, that brain of yours, he said, we have no solution for that either. We can't fix your brain. We're not counselors. We're not therapists. We're not psychiatrists. We're not psychologists. That's not what we do in AA, right? And I was like, man, Joe, no offense, but you're kind of a jerk, right? I mean, you get me to admit all these horrible things about myself, this inability to even manage my life because of my thinking, and this absolute inability to manage my drinking once I start because of this body I have. And you get me to admit that. And then you take all hope away from me by saying that there's nothing you can do about my body or my mind. What kind of message is that? And he said, oh, that's the message of AA. You see, the message of AA, Mike, is not a message of hope. It never has been, it never will be. The message of Alcoholics Anonymous is a message of hopelessness followed by a message of hope. Because if you're not screwed, if you don't know what you have, you'll choose an easier solution than the work. But if you understand, truthfully, that you are really powerless over alcohol, and that truthfully your life is unmanageable, maybe you'll do the work. Maybe you'll complete the work. Maybe you'll do more than 1 through 5 like a treatment center makes you do, right? Maybe you'll actually complete the process and have this thing called a spiritual awakening so that God can keep you sober, right? Maybe you'll get those amazing promises, not only before step 10, but man, the ones in step 10. How great are those, right? And so he said, I'm looking at him, I'm going, so we don't work on the body? He's like, no. We don't work on the mind? No. I said, well, what do we do in AA? He said, we only work on the third part. And I said, well, what's the third part? And he said, well, that's your broken soul. And I got to tell you, that phrase hit me in the gut deeply. It somehow began to explain all of these things that I couldn't explain about myself. This confusion, this isolation, this sense of brokenness, this sense of being different, a round peg in a square hole, on the outside looking in, all of these phrases, that seemed to encapsulate for me. And he said, do you have a broken soul? And frankly, I was too ashamed to say yes. I just felt really embarrassed by that, like somehow I wasn't supposed to have one, or that good people don't have one. But I got to tell you, I felt horrible. I didn't know how to say it. And so he said, well, let me ask you some questions. I'll ask you some. He said, Mike, the number one symptom of a broken soul is lack of power. So I'll ask you some questions, and you get to decide whether this is true or not, whether this thing called lack of power applies to you. And I said, okay. And he said, Mike, is it wrong to lie? And I said, well, of course it's wrong to lie. Everybody knows that. He goes, do you lie? Whoops, right? And then I said, well, only when absolutely necessary, not one time more. And then he said, look, is it wrong to objectify and use women? And I said, well, yeah. He said, how's your relationships going? Boy, not so good, Joe. Hey, is it wrong to say horrible things to your mom? Yeah. Hey, how's that relationship going? Oh, man, awful. Hey, is it wrong to get a paycheck you're not actually working for? And I went, yeah, they call that stealing. He goes, yeah, they do. How's your career doing? Not so good. He must have asked me 20, 25 behavior questions, all of which, by the way, I got right. I just want to make that clear right now, right? However, when he followed up with the application questions, I got all of those wrong, right? So I knew what to do, I just couldn't pull it off. I knew how to live, sort of, but I could never exercise that which I knew. I could never get it into actual practice. I don't know about anybody on this thing, but on this call, but I know about me. And Mondays were my favorite day, like somewhere around Saturday afternoon, when I had promised myself Friday I wouldn't be drinking this weekend, and Saturday afternoon I'm making my plans to go to the bar, right? And I'll say, Monday, I'm going to get through the weekend. And then Monday, man, I'm going to be at work on time. I'm going to get my act together. This is it for me. Monday is going to be my day to start over. You know, of course that never happened, right? And so he said, Mike, do you have an allergy to alcohol? I said, yeah. He said, do you have a mind that lies to you? I said, yeah. He said, do you have a broken soul? I said, yeah. He said, step one is done, kid. And if you'll do the work with me, I'll sponsor you. I said, okay. He said, tell me about God. Now, again, I don't have big book knowledge. By now, after these 2 or 3 conversations, talking about step one with him, I got 65, 70 days, right? He said, tell me about God. I said, well, he must be big and he must be nice. And he said, well, why do you think he's big? And I said, well, when I go outside, I see these trees and I see the sky and I see all this stuff. And look, if he made all that, he's got to be at least that big. He's likely bigger than that. So he must be big. Not bad, kid. Way to go. Why nice? And I kind of got a little choked, you know, and as a Chicago kid who grew up without a dad, I thought it was really weak to cry in front of anybody. So I did whatever I could to not do that. And I bit my lip really hard. And I said something along the lines of, look, I know I don't deserve a second chance, and somehow I feel like God is giving me one. And if he's giving me one, then he must be good. He must be better than I think. Not bad. He said, do you think that if there's a God out there, that he would have the capacity to help you, to restore you to some level of sanity? Do you think if he exists, he's got that power? And I thought about it and I said, well, I think so. And he said, why? And I said, well, I heard your story, right? And I hadn't heard Carl's yet, but I have since then. And I can tell you, after hearing Carl's story, I think it's true. There's a few other good friends I have on the line here today, and I can tell you I've heard their stories. And I think after hearing their stories, look, if God can work for them, maybe God can work for me. I've been to enough AA meetings where I heard other people say, God helped me with this, God helped me with that, God helped me with the other. And it was your testimonies and your stories that gave me the hope to believe that maybe God would work for me too. Not definitely, just maybe. And that's enough in step 2. It doesn't say came to believe that God will restore me to sanity. It says came to believe that God could restore me to sanity, that God actually has the capacity to help me. And it was the people in Alcoholics Anonymous and their stories that gave me that hope. And we went through the doctor's opinion. And we went through Bill's story. And we went through There Is a Solution. And we went through more about alcohols. And we got to this thing called We Agnostics. And that chapter helped me a lot. Right? And then we moved into how it works. We got on our hands and knees and we said the 3rd step prayer. And while we were down there, he said something to me. He said, Mike, I don't want you to believe for a second that you've completed step 3. What you did was say the 3rd step prayer, and that's not the same thing. It sounds like the same thing, and it's not really the same thing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, step 3 is a decision. The answer and the solution that we provide in Alcoholics Anonymous is the fulfillment of that decision. You can make decisions all day long and never fulfill them, and it doesn't do you any good. We take this 3rd step prayer, and really what we're doing, Mike, is we're audibly declaring our willingness to work 4 through 12. That's really what the 3rd step prayer says. And we know that because of what's on top of page 64. There's this great, one of my favorite sentences in the big book. Though our decision, meaning step 3, was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face. And Joe told me face meant 4 and 5, steps 4 and 5, and to be rid of. And Joe told me that was 6 through 12, the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. The liquor was but a symptom. There it is. We had to get down to causes and conditions. Right? So he handed me a piece of paper and a pen, and he said, as you work 4 through 12, you'll be fulfilling your decision in 3. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write down a 4th step. And we did that. He had me write down people, institutions, and principles that I resented. There was quite a few of those. And then he told me, why do you have the resentment? I was supposed to write all that down, you know. Then we went through the little things, little check marks from little Joe and Charlie sheets, right? Good, bad, love them, don't love them, doesn't matter. It worked really well for me. No debate society here. I'm good with whatever methodology you use. What matters is that you do it, I think, right? And before we got into that 4th column, we talked about these prayers on resentment. And I said, oh, yeah, I was in a meeting one time and I heard this lady say that there's this deal and you're supposed to pray for someone that you resent for a couple of weeks and then the resentment magically goes away. He said, well, I don't know about the last part of that, but there's nothing wrong with praying for people you resent. He said, but let's look at the text. Let's see what the book says. And you know what's interesting? Although you'd never hear me talk anyone out of praying for someone that they resent, it's interesting that in the first portion of our book, when they talk about prayers and resentments, they ask me to pray for me. They don't really ask me to pray for the other person that I resent. They ask me to pray for me. We ask that God would show us give us the ability to show the same pity, patience, and tolerance that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. It says, God, save me from being angry. Show me how I'm being helpful to them. It's as if in some way they're alluding to this, oddly enough, that I might be the chief victim of my own resentments. That those darn things might be hurting me more than the other person. I got to tell you, they were, and I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. Prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, when I would feel resentful toward another person, I really deeply believed that they were the one in the relationship that needed to change. Today, that's absolutely not true. Today, when my gut pings with some level of resentful feelings, I've been given a path in 10 and 11 to walk away from that, to find a new avenue, to take actions that don't breed more resentment. But prior to coming to you, all of my actions and all of my solutions to solve my resentments created more problems for me. My solutions to all of my problems prior to meeting all of you caused more problems than my problems ever caused me. My solutions were more damaging in my life than my problems were. That's just the truth. And then we moved into fear. And I was supposed to write down all my fear. And we got to this spot and it said that all men of faith have courage. And we talked about courage for a little bit. I want to make sure I'm not late here. And we talked about courage for a little bit. And what was interesting is the more we talked, he asked me, he said, well, Mike, tell me some people that you think are courageous. You know, and I thought about it, and I thought of my mom. My mom is probably the most courageous human being I've ever met in my life. She's a wonderful person. And, you know, when my dad died, I was 6 years old. My sister was 8. She continued to work hard as a waitress and keep the roof over our head, and made sure we had food in our stomach, and made sure we went to good schools. Like she was, and that could not have been easy. And we went through this whole list. You know, police officers and firemen and maybe military people have no fear, and civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and all these, maybe all of those guys were courageous. And he said, you know, what's the one thing that all those courageous people have in common? I don't know. And he looked me right in the eye with a smile on his face and he said, fear. You cannot be courageous without fear. It's impossible. Mike, when you're laying on your couch and you got your remote in your hand and you're going from ESPN to ESPN2 to ESPN3 to ESPN4 to ESPN Ocho, right? You are, that is not a courageous act, right? That is not, but when you are bitten with fear, man, and you're in the face and it's easier to walk away and take the weaker road rather than maybe the road that God would have paved for you through virtue. To choose the road of virtue in the face of your fear, Mike, that's courage. I was like, wow, that's cool. That just sort of touched me a little bit. So we finished those. We said the prayers in fear. We went on to sex conduct. And we went through this whole thing on sex conduct. You see, I thought sex was a verb. Isn't that weird? It turns out it's a verb and a noun, right? In the context of which it is, it's a noun. That's the phrasing, right? So when a job application, Joe says to me, look, when you're filling out a job application and you come to the part where it says sex, you don't write in that small little box, please, right after the interview. That's not what you do, right? You'll say, well, it depends on the benefits package. Like, that's not what you write down, right? You pick one. You pick one. And this was my conduct as a male that I was to be reviewing here, that I was to be investigating. Certainly sexual behavior would include in that, but it wouldn't be limited to it. It wouldn't be limited to it. And we went through this whole thing. We got it all down on paper. And then it says we go back to that list and we ask ourselves what we should have done instead, which is a beautiful question to ask. What should I have done instead? And I wrote all that down. And from that information, I was to shape a sane and sound ideal for my future sex life. And I was to write that down. And then there's these prayers on page 70 about sex, that there's a thing called sexual sanity, that there's a thing about the strength to do the right thing, right? Guidance in questionable situations, right? All of these things come together, and that whole thing is called a 4-step. And I took that paperwork and I went and I told some guy this stuff for 6 hours in our 5th step, right? And on the bottom of page 75, it says you take the book down from the shelf and you go find a place where you can be quiet for an hour. And I did that. And I asked myself those questions that seemingly are kind of stupid. I thank God from the bottom of my heart that I knew him better. And I asked myself, are the stones properly in place? Have I tried to make mortar without sand? You know, have I skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Really, what those questions I think are asking us is, Mike Donnelly, are you being sincere this time? Or are you full of crap again? And if I can answer to my satisfaction on the top of page 76, I'm supposed to move on. And I come up to these questions on willingness. Am I now ready to let God remove these things, all of them from me? That's a yes or no question. Can he now take them all, every one? It's a yes or no question. And the beautiful part of the big book is it doesn't slap me across the face if I say no. It doesn't say I'm a bad person if I say no. It just says, pray for what you don't have. If you don't have the willingness to let God take them, you pray for it. And that's what Joe told me. And I got to be honest with you. There were some things I really wanted God to take and change. And then there was other things that I was just simply too afraid to let him have. I just didn't know who I would be without them. And frankly, through the miracle of the 10th step, there were some things that were just eating my lunch that I didn't even know were defective parts of me at that time. This is my first run through the program. You know, I learned a lot about myself in step 10. Some things I just couldn't see. So I went through, and those parts where I wanted God to take those things from me, I told him that. And those parts where I wasn't sure, I told him I didn't want him to. I just prayed for the willingness. And then we said the 7-step prayer, and then we moved into what I think is absolutely the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. Absolutely the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. Up to this point, even up to the point of the 8th step, where I'm praying for the willingness, and I've written these things, all of these people down that I owe restitution to, or institutions, all these things. Even up to that point, it's almost solitary with the exception of God and the person I've shared my 5th step with, or maybe my sponsor, but it's just me. Now it goes out. It goes out to all these people that I've harmed and hurt. And I was to reach out to these people, and I was trying to do 4 things. We don't have time today, but I can show you where they're at in the big book. Joe taught me that there were 4 parts to an amend. An act of confession, I was to tell him what I did. An act of contrition, I was to express my godly sorrow about doing it, that I felt bad about doing it, which is different than saying I'm sorry. The 3rd thing, I was to give them some level of restitution that was fair and just for what I had done. And then I was to stop doing it, an act of repentance. So it was an act of confession, an act of contrition, an act of restitution, and an act of repentance. And I tried to do that as best I could. Some were better than others, but for the most part, it went astonishingly well. I wrote a letter to my dad who had passed away when I was 6 years old, and I went to his grave and I read this letter at his gravesite. My dad was an inordinately honorable man. He was a veteran of the Chicago Police Department. He was a Korean War veteran. He believed in honor and virtue. He showed me how to love people the way I watched him love my mom. He brought me to church and taught me how to pray. And I was not like that. I took my family name, and the things I had done were anything but honorable. They were dishonorable. And I felt horrible about that. I can feel it today as I'm telling you this story. And I stood at that gravesite and I read this letter to my dad. And I don't even know what happened. I can't even tell you. I didn't have a vision. Nothing changed. Nothing visible happened. But in my heart, I knew I was closer to my dad than I ever was before, and I can't even explain that to you. And all I know is that in some way, I felt like he was going to try to help me if he could. I don't even know how to explain that, but it's just true. I could just feel that my dad was going to try to help me. I went to my mom, and I paid back the money that I had stolen from her. I used to climb in her front room window and take money out of her purse and booze out of her fridge because I couldn't live without a drink. And Just the things I said to that poor woman as she tried to help me throughout my life. There's just no way to say, I'm sorry, it's just not enough. What I had to do was more. And I could feel that. And I didn't know how to do it. And so I went to Joe and I said, I don't know how to make this right. And he said, here's what I want you to do. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to throw out the old idea. Because the old idea is, Mike, is that you had a bad mother. The truth is, she had a bad son. And that's very different. She had a bad son. You didn't have a bad mother. And so what I want you to do is I want you to call her every week and I want you to ask her 2 questions. And the first question is, hey, Mom, how was your week? And the second question is, wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that? And early on, Mike, she's not going to respond, right? I mean, you're the guy that broke into her house. So don't think she's like supposed to roll out some red carpet and genuflect now that you have 90 days or 120 days. That's not how that works. It's going to take time, but just keep calling. And I did that. I started calling my mom every week. And the first calls were cold, man. They were cold. Hey, Ma, how was your week? Fine. Wow, that sounds interesting. Could you tell me more about that? Really fine. Like it just didn't go very well, right? But over time, my mom's answers began to get longer. She began to talk to me. And what's even more amazing to me, even after a few more months, here's what's really miraculous about this process. I actually began to care about the answers she gave me. And before my eyes, I became a son. Understanding what alcoholism is, believing in some God, saying a prayer in step 3 would have not changed my heart. What changed my heart was the miracle of the principles in 4 through 9 that are repeated in step 10 and repeated at some level in step 11, and that we try to carry to other people in step 12. It's the principles being practiced over and over and over and over again that bring about this transformation, this conversion of heart. Our big book talk. These are all big book phrases. They're not mine. They're all in there. We're looking for something way more than sobriety. And the truth is, if I would have settled for just sobriety, I wouldn't be a son today. I went to women that I had hurt, and I apologized for my behavior. And I told them that they didn't deserve to be treated the way I treated them. And if there was anything I could do to make it right, I would do it. And some gave me things to do, and I did them, and some didn't. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about that process. I learned a lot about what it means to be a man and what it means to be respectful to women. I had $40,000 in credit card debt, none of which was a big screen TV, by the way. There was nothing good on that 40 grand. It was all like pizza and beer money and late fees. That's where the 40 grand came from. It was trash. And slowly but surely, I began to chip away at that financial iceberg, and I got out of it. I got done, paid it off. I didn't file federal income tax for 4 years prior to joining Alcoholics Anonymous. It took me 3.5 years to pay that off. Month by month by month by month. I'm free today. I'm free today. Not because I'm good, not because I'm smart, not because I'm wise, because none of that's true. I'm free today because a God who reaches with his invisible arms of love reached down into the gutter one day in August of 1991 and pulled this drunk out of it. And then took his other hand and he brought me and Joe together. And Joe was good enough to open that book. He had an experience with the first 12 steps himself, the first 9 steps himself, and that led him to step 12. And Joe committed his life, and he taught me how to bring this message to other people, and I owe that man everything. Over the course of my life, I got to tell you, nothing has impacted me more. Make sure I'm not late here. Nothing has impacted me more than the 12th step, not only as a recipient, but as someone who tries to bring this message. If you're new tonight and you're not sure this will work for you, you might be right, but I doubt it. If you're new tonight and you're thinking, it's not worth doing this stuff, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Decide whether it was worth it once you're done. Decide whether it was worth it once you're done. If you've been around a little while and you know the language and you know the deal and you've got friends in AA and you have a reputation at your meeting and you're a guy who leads things, or maybe you're GSR or whatever, but the steps aren't complete and your heart's still broken, Don't let your reputation in Alcoholics Anonymous be a block to having a conversion, to having a change of heart, to experiencing this spiritual awakening that the 12-step promises. Reach out to somebody. Don't let that knocking on the door of your heart tonight go unanswered. Just answer it. Just answer it and do the work and experience this God who loves you. I have about 3 minutes left, and I'm going to quickly tell a story that I think absolutely is the synopsis of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 7 years old, and my mom was walking me through Toys R Us. And it was right after my dad had died. It was the November after my dad had died. And we came around this corner, there was an end display cabinet, and it had all these dolls. And the doll was giant robot from Lost in Space. I don't know if anybody remembers Lost in Space. And I wanted one so bad, man. I was like, please, give me the robot, give me the robot. My mom's like, look, it's November. If you're a good boy, Santa will bring you one for Christmas. Well, she lied. I was a horrible boy, but I have a good mother, so she brought one anyway, and I got one for Christmas from Santa. And I opened this thing up, man, and I'm telling you, I lost my lunch. I could not believe how much fun I had with this thing. I mean, the couch was one planet, the chair was another planet, the stairs into my basement was like walking into one of the craters of the moon. Man, I was all about it, you know? And somewhere around the 5th or 6th of January, my mom ran off to this little store that used to be around called Woolworths. And she grabbed these D batteries, and she shoved 2 or 3 of them in the butt end of this thing, and it lit up like the 4th of July. Lights were going off. You pulled this thing out from the back, you push one button, it rolled forward. You push another, it went the other way. You hit the red button, it said, Danger, Will Robinson, Danger, Will Robinson. See, I submit to everyone on this call that that is Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I came to AA, batteries not included. And what I found through the first 9 steps were batteries that gave me power. And I keep those batteries charged by trying as best I can, as imperfectly as I can, but as best I can, steps 10, 11, and 12. And when my batteries are charged and God can work through me, amazing things can happen. The power doesn't originate in me. I'm no different than I was when I first met you, except for one thing. I've discovered a power greater than myself who was around me the whole time. I just didn't know how to tap into him. Because of good people in Alcoholics Anonymous, 12 steps and a big book, I found a means to do that. If you're out there tonight and you're suffering, you don't have to. Do the work. God bless you all. Thank you for having me tonight. Carl, thank you, brother. I love you. Thank you.